What the hell is going on? I was just complaining about how most religious horror films are garbage, and 2024 seems to be breaking that curse. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the first Omen. This is a prequel to the 1976 original directed by Richard Donner. Despite the fact that I'm a huge horror buff, I've never been a massive fan of that original Omen film. It's not that I think it's bad or anything. It's a solid 7, 8 out of 10 film, but it's never been one of those classics that I return to every year to rewatch around the Halloween season. It didn't leave that impression on me like The Exorcist or Alien or Halloween, all of these other distinctive cult classic horror films that have become a massive part of pop culture. So that's strike one in terms of reasons why I wasn't really pumped to see this. Strike number two is that this is the feature film debut from director Arkasha Stevenson. And you know, first-time directors, a bit hit or miss. And finally, strike number three, well, it's a religious-themed horror film about nuns, and 90% of the films in this subgenre are garbage. Oh, if I had to add a fourth one, it would be the fact that the review embargo didn't drop until yesterday, which was the day that the public could start screening the film. That's never a good sign. I have no idea why the studio had no faith in this, because the movie is actually kind of great. It's set in 1970s Rome. Margaret, played by Nell Tiger-Free, is our protagonist. She moves to an Italian orphanage from the States to take her vows as a nun. Immediately after moving in, she befriends this younger girl, Carlita, who seems to be the black sheep among the orphanage. She's very solitary, doesn't spend time with the other children. She's constantly being punished by the higher-ups for alleged bad behavior. And there are reasons that we will learn later on as to why Margaret is drawn to Carlita and is able to sympathize with her due to things that happened in her past. But before long, Margaret unearths evidence that suggests that this orphanage may be up to some nefarious things that involve a greater scope of evil than she could have possibly imagined. That's the setup for this film. Like I said, surprisingly great. I went in with such low expectations, and this, especially as a prequel, is better than it has any right to be. Dare I say, even better than the original. That's going to be a super hot take. One thing that I really like about this film that distinguishes it from others in its genre is that the world is very well fleshed out. It takes that 70s vibe and actually does things with it. During this time period in Rome, there were significant civil rights protests, so it's dangerous for these nuns to be walking around. So they have drivers that actually transport them around the city. There are conflicts within the church. Not everything is static, and a lot of these characters feel like real humans rather than just chess pieces that are being used to deliver exposition and move pieces of the plot around to its own convenience. Not all of the characters are fleshed out equally. Bill Nye, not that Bill Nye, no, the Bill Nye that played Davy Jones. He plays a character in this that I thought was very cliche, and we didn't learn much about him, even though he plays a pretty integral role. But where it really counts, the film pours a lot of character development, particularly into our main character, Margaret, played by Nell Tiger-Free. I had never heard of this girl before, but her performance is epic. A lot of this movie rests on her shoulders, and in a few key scenes that could have easily ruined the film if she wasn't good. Man, I was amazed and kind of in awe by how good her performance is. And it makes me sad to think about the fact that come the end of the year, it's probably not going to be talked about in award season at all. There are some twists and reveals later on in the movie, none of which were very shocking to me. I thought they were pretty well telegraphed, and if you've seen the original Omen, which I don't think you need to watch this. In fact, you could definitely watch this and then watch the Omen from 1976, and maybe that's actually the better way to do it because you'll have less knowledge of what's going to happen. Not that this movie doesn't stand on its own two legs as a separate entity, but it does have a tie-in to the original, and I think they executed it fairly well without feeling like it's reliant on that original. I want to stop for a second and acknowledge the gruesome body horror in the first Omen. It honestly pushes the boundaries of what you can show at points, and I'm not surprised to learn that this had to be cut a bit to avoid the NC-17 rating. In a modern age where we get so many neutered PG-13 horror flicks like Imaginary and Night Swim, it's good to walk into one and genuinely be scared of what I'm about to see next because it keeps pushing those boundaries and it walks that fine line between being gratuitous and being too tame to the point where it doesn't hide anything from you, but it also doesn't overindulge, if that makes any sense. If you had a difficult time getting through Immaculate and some of the childbirth type scenes in that film, you might as well not even bother with the first Omen. It's sad to say this, but I just can't remember the last time I was watching a horror film in theaters and was actually physically wincing. Granted, I'm a pretty seasoned horror fan, so it takes a lot to really get under my skin. What's perhaps even more important than the gore and body horror, though, is the actual suspense. That's what we come to horror movies for, right? That's what gives us that underlying feeling of dread. Because you can go and watch a film that has a lot of jump scares, that consists solely of a loud noise that's meant to startle you in your seat. That's not being genuinely scared, that's just being startled. There's a very big difference between those two things. And it's all about building tension and building suspense. I think the first Omen builds suspense brilliantly at certain points. And I can't praise Arkasha Stevenson enough and her cinematographer for what they were able to pull off here, not only in really giving us a strong visualization of 1970s Rome, but also framing each shot in a way that builds the suspense and lingers on things just long enough to get you creeped out.
It's not real. 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 Who said that?
In terms of my issues, they mostly come down to the times that it does use cheap jump scares, because there are a couple, and there are some tropes involving religious horror that are very commonplace. Some of them you can even see in Immaculate, which came out less than a month ago. I will say there are a few characters that have confusing motivations that are never addressed. Like, we see them initially and they're on Margaret's side, and things change later on, but we never hear anything from that character's perspective to understand what's going on in their head. And lastly, there's an epilogue that only exists to set up a potential continuation. I don't think we really need that. This is fine as a standalone. As a fan of horror and as somebody who has been extremely disappointed with what this genre has given us so far this year, I'm pleased to say that the first Omen is surprisingly great and among the best films overall of the year so far. So I'm going to give it 4 out of 5. Outstanding performances, great direction and cinematography, the score is fantastic, and for the most part I think it handles the suspense and the body horror quite well to really get under your skin and unnerve you, even if it doesn't outright frighten you. Like, this isn't the scariest movie I've ever seen, but it's the scariest movie I've seen this year, that's for sure. It clearly draws some inspiration from things like Suspiria, and I'm mostly talking about the 2018 remake directed by Luca Guadagnino. And there's one scene in particular that I don't want to talk too much about it because you'll know exactly what scene I'm talking about if you've seen this film, but Possession from 1981, there's a scene from that film that this clearly draws inspiration from. It had to have been intentional. There's no way it wasn't. But this scene worked so well within the context of the first Omen that it didn't bother me. It was a really good example of taking inspiration from something else. So I'll tell you right now, if you have any reservations about this, know that it is much better than you're probably thinking it is, and if you're a fan of extreme horror and you can handle the really gruesome R-rated stuff, you should definitely go and check this one out. And if you do, let me know in the comments what you think of the first Omen. And if you want to see more content like this, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.